Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who action figure product review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the first of a number of sets being released by Character Options as a part of the B&M exclusive run of action figures. In today's review I'm going to be taking a look at the 5th Doctor and Tardis from the final Peter Davison 5th Doctor story, The Caves of Androzani, from 1984. This set is the first of 2 Tardis releases coming out in B&M for the 2019 run of action figures, the other being the 4th Doctor and Tardis from the Doctor Who story Sharda. The recommended retail for this product is $19.99 and it will be available from B&M stores throughout the UK during August. So this is in fact a rather exciting release because a lot of Doctor Who action figure collectors have been anticipating the release of a 5th Doctor TARDIS for a number of years. I do believe that the 5th Doctor TARDIS was in fact originally meant to be released alongside the original classic series TARDISes in the Forbidden Planet exclusive line. However, that product was in fact never released. Until now, we in fact have a brand new TARDIS with a few additional adjustments to the sculpt, as well as a rather exciting new variant of the 5th Doctor, which is once again been expected for a number of years. Unlike the previous Doctor and TARDIS sets that have been available, most notably the 3rd Doctor and TARDIS release that I do believe came out last year, this product is in fact going to be of a much larger production run, meaning that it should be a little bit easier to come by in B&M stores throughout the next few months. So taking a look at the packaging, this is in fact the brand new style that came in earlier this year, with of course the 13th Doctor new series Doctor Who logo. At the bottom of the box it does state that this is the 5th Doctor and TARDIS from the Caves of Androzani, along with a brand new limited edition sticker. Towards the sides of this it does also state that this set is an exclusive Doctor and TARDIS set. The preview window does also extend to the sides of the box in order to get a good look at the figures on the inside. At the opposite side we get the repetition of the Doctor Who logo as well as the title of the set, along with the promotional image of the product itself. The back of the box contains your usual product information along with the promotional image of the product once again in a rather nice, smart and stylish design. Towards the sides of the promotional image we do also get a little bit of a write-up on the Caves of Androzani that actually goes into a little bit more detail than usual that you would come to expect on other Doctor Who action figures, even stating that the episode was written by Robert Holmes, as well as it being the 6th story from season 21, which is something that normally isn't included from what I can remember. Overall, I really do like this brand new packaging design that was brought in with the earlier release from this year being the 4th Doctor Regenerated alongside the Planet of the Spiders TARDIS. I think that it certainly looks very modern and stylish compared to that of the previous version, and I really like its incorporation of Gallifreyan text along the top trim, as well as the latest Doctor Who logo. I'm really happy to see that the creativity of the backdrops that started off on the 4th Doctor Regenerated B&M TARDIS set from earlier this year is once again continuing, as the backdrop for this box is a really lovely landscape of Androzani with a rather intriguing explosion going on in the background, and naturally if you have space you can of course display the TARDIS as well as the 5th Doctor alongside this, which I think is a really cool feature and really nicely sets off the products. So here we have the 5th Doctor and his TARDIS exterior out of the box. Now this set is in fact a rather exciting one because it is the first ever opportunity for classic Doctor Who fans who did not pick up the original 1st Doctor and 7th Doctor TARDISes to in fact get a classic series TARDIS exterior with the stacked roof sculpt, of course because the previous B&M TARDIS releases have in fact been the original 4th Doctor non-stack roof, so this does essentially open up the boundaries of opportunity for further later era TARDISes to come in the future. We are edging even closer to getting a 6th Doctor TARDIS release and I can't quite wait for that day to happen. But this set is absolutely lovely and it is really exciting as well, considering that this brand new TARDIS does in fact also feature a slight adjustment in its sculpt, which does also make this TARDIS noticeably different in its sculpt as well as paint application. As for the actual 5th Doctor itself, it is really lovely to add another variation to the collection, especially considering that the original figure, that does have a very similar appearance to this version, is in fact one that is now pretty rare indeed, and does have a completely different head, being the next incarnation as Colin Baker as the 6th Doctor from the very end of the story. So firstly, taking a look at the Fifth Doctor as portrayed by Peter Davison. Now the general sculpt of this figure is in fact exactly the same to all of the other costumed Fifth Doctor figures that we have seen over the years. However, the paint application does seem to have had a major overhaul. Immediately as soon as I got this figure out of the box, I got the impression of the Fifth Doctor figure as seen within the 13 Doctors collector set, as the costume itself does seem to be a lot darker. So immediately before we go any further with this figure, I'm going to compare it to the previously released and rather rare Sixth Doctor, also from the Caves of Androzani, and was in fact one of the first ever Classic Series action figures to be released as a part of the Forbidden Planet series. So generally the idea of the weathering itself is pretty much exactly the same, with the majority of the mud and battered design taking place on the figure's right shoulder. As you can see, the weathering itself though has received a little bit of a revision once again. The Sixth Doctor regenerated is a much more block brown colour, and the recently released Fifth Doctor is a much more detailed design. We have lots of different shades here, as you can see, lots of different brush strokes of the muddy colours, especially some lighter browns in there as well. In fact doesn't stretch as far down on the coat this time round, with the bottom half remaining pretty much clean. However, on the Sixth Doctor figure here, this does in fact stretch further down the costume itself, and even with a few brush strokes of mud at the very bottom. Then of course in the very middle we do also get the cricket jumper itself. On the Fifth Doctor design, this does seem to be a little bit more of almost an ink splodge design using a black colour, and then on the Sixth Doctor this is of course a much more muddier splattered design. Don't believe that either of these actually look like how it did look visually. However, it still is a good representation. Of course it does work rather well that the Fifth Doctor figure is less muddy compared to that of the Sixth Doctor. Maybe this is just as he is running to the TARDIS, and then this is his costume after he has ran to the TARDIS and all the explosions have gone off, and naturally within that time he has become a lot more battered and weathered. Turning the figures around to the back, once again we have pretty much exactly the same design. On the Sixth Doctor we do have this interesting design of mud almost being ripped down the slide here in a rather straight manner. However, on the Fifth Doctor figure here it is a lot more unpredictable. Once again, and much like the Sixth Doctor, this is in fact limited under the actual arm section, where it is pretty much just your average clean with no weathering applied to this whatsoever, which does look a little bit unusual, but I don't really mind it too much. Moving down to the lower half of the figure to once again take a look at the further pieces of weathering on the costume, we have something a little bit unusual that happens, because the Sixth Doctor figure and the Fifth Doctor have completely different designs of trousers, and I don't really mind this too much, to be honest, even though it is a little bit of a continuity issue really in the grand scheme of things. Of course the Sixth Doctor figure is much more based around that of the Fifth Doctor from Resurrection of the Daleks within the Fifth Doctor's last season. However, this latest version of the Fifth Doctor here is in a much more, once again, darker cream trouser design with a salmon pink pinstripe over the top. However, pretty much the weathering has remained quite similar. So as you can see, we have a few bits running up the sides here, as well to the top half of the crotch section. Actually, the weathering on this figure does stand out a little bit more compared to this version due to the colours that have been used on the actual trousers themselves. And then of course at the very bottom we do also get the shoes, which have been given some nice detailing, of course, of the darker sole sections, as well as the white, both of which have been once again given a smudged black design over the top to create the impression of dirt. Other than the obvious mud and general damage design around the figure itself, the costume does pretty much remain exactly the same. So in the very middle we do get the cricket jumper, which has been given this really lovely almost woolen texture, giving a really nice impression of the material itself, and this has been given the slightly later Davison paint app, using some more darker reds on the different rows and strands on the woolen jumper itself, along with the darker strips of black along the very top. Of course, we do also get the detailing of the shirt underneath, which has been painted in a standard white colour, as well as the highlights of the darker green under the collar itself, and of course the question marks around the side of the collar can be very briefly seen if you tilt the figure to the side. The Fifth Doctor's overcoat is also its regular sculpt, featuring exactly the same detail to usual. Of course, the general colour itself is a much darker cream, as previously mentioned, and the piping design is a much more orangey colour as opposed to the usual red on the older figures. The detailing of this has also been used, of course, around the outline of the pockets, which can be seen on the side of the 5th Doctor figure, as well as on the cuff sections of the jacket itself. Sculpting of the buttons have been nicely brought out by using a darker black paint app, which is something of which that I actually assumed might have been left off this figure, because in the past on the previous B&M exclusive figures, small details like this have sometimes been lost. I do believe that he did have several cuts on his hands throughout the later half of the episode, as well as on his head. And I don't really know why Character Options have left this out. I don't know if there's a little bit of an unusual subject around the use of blood on action figures, considering it is meant to be a children's toy after all, but it still does make for a nice figure without it. It may have been nice to add a little bit of blood on there, just to make this figure a little bit more visually interesting. The likeness to Peter Davison is okay, once again using exactly the same sculpt to usual, and it has in fact seen a few revisions within the paint apps themselves. So as you can see at the very front of the figure, we do have the eyes and the eyebrows as well as the mouth that have been rather nicely painted. However, the mouth itself does seem to be a little bit unusual. It does seem to be almost like he's smirking a little bit, compared to that of the previous 5th Doctor figures that seem to just have a bit more of a serene expression. However, I think you can certainly tell who it is meant to be. Tilting the head around to the side, we do also have a few very nice paint applications around the sides of the hair. As you can see, some of the strands have been really nicely brought out by some slightly more lighter yellow highlights, and then of course underneath this we have a much more darker paint app that has been really nicely emphasised by those lighter paint apps over the tops. I think that this figure is certainly down to the pick of the draw. Some of them will look brilliant, others will look a little bit unusual. It's kind of a similar case to that of the 3rd Doctor and 4th Doctor. They either look fine or they either look seriously ill. It's always one of the two. And I think that this figure is pretty much okay, and as I say, you can certainly tell who it is meant to be. And finally, to end off for the 5th Doctor, just doing a little bit of a comparison to that of the previous 5th Doctor releases, there is a major difference between the costume colours, as you can see on this Resurrection of the Daleks version of the 5th Doctor, and generally it is just really lovely to finally be able to add this figure to the collection, because it has seemed an obvious variant for so long, so it is very nice to add this finally to the shelf, along with the Regeneration 6th Doctor, of course, released many years ago. And as for articulation, it is standard to usual. The head would do a 360, but it is a little bit stiff. Of course, you have 360 at the arm, as well as 360 at the upper arm, bend at 90 at the elbow, 360 at the wrist, you have 360 at the waist, T-crotch joint, as well as 360 at the upper thigh, and of course bend at the knee as well. So pretty much your regular articulation to a usual Doctor Who 5-inch action figure. And of course, no Doctor would be complete without their Tardis, and after many years, it is brilliant to finally be able to welcome to the collection the 5th Doctor's Tardis exterior. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the sculpt of this figure is in fact the stacked roof Tardis, used originally on the 7th Doctor Tardis and then later on the 1st Doctor Tardis. So it is really nice to see a reissue of this sculpt, because it does open up the opportunities to see other 80s Tardises in the future. And I think that it must be said, this is certainly one of the most striking variants so far, compared to that of the other B&M Tardises that we have seen. So jumping right in with the major difference for this TARDIS box, it is of course the base, and I cannot quite believe that I'm looking at this in all honesty, because I just expected them to re-release the 7th Doctor TARDIS sculpt and paint it differently, and it is surprising how much difference this new sculpt has. So basically, just to bring in the original 7th Doctor TARDIS at the very side to give a close-up of the base, as you can see there's not really too much going on. This one is in fact just a flat design with of course the standard wood texture added over the top. I think that has in fact been rather nicely blended to the original sculpt. And then as you can see on the 7th Doctor TARDIS, this is a much more higher design, as well as using a slant around this as well. It does adjust the height of this TARDIS to be ever so slightly smaller, but also make this TARDIS box generally look better in its dimensions, even though it is still off from the original TARDIS prop as seen on TV. But I think that this certainly does the job and is incredibly effective. So other than the base and the wooden texture that has been applied to this, the actual paint application over the top of the TARDIS box has also seen a rather striking change. As you can see along the very bottom of this base, we do once again have a rather similar mud design to the 5th Doctor figure that has been applied to replicate essentially the landscape of Androzani that was used within the story, that was of course most definitely a quarry, probably somewhere down south. So we do also have a few little bits of weathering that do also accentuate extend to the bottom half of the TARDIS box as well, which as per usual does also have this really lovely wooden grain texture, collecting in the ridges of the actual panels to create a little bit of shading, but also give the box the impression of depth as well. Originally I was a little bit unsure around this weathering, and I think that it is no doubt something that does vary between the different toys, but I think that for this TARDIS especially, this variant is something that is quite nice and does once again make this TARDIS stand out on the shelf. Moving further up the box, of course the general sculpt itself, we've all seen it many times before. We have the different square panels that have been applied around the sides, and then of course this slightly more subtle weathering paint tap that has also been applied around the sides as well, to give the box a much more dirtied effect, which I think is once again incredibly effective. On the back of the box we do also have, sadly, the sound grate as well as the back battery panel, which is of course something that has been left over from the original Forbidden Planet exclusive TARDISes. Its function has of course been removed for the sake of costs, bearing in mind that the original sound TARDIS was packaged with a Doctor for the recommended retail of around £35, and this set is only £20. I suppose it does make sense to remove this feature, although it is a shame that of course the battery compartment is still there, but in order to remove it, it once again would require a whole new retool and a brand new sculpt, which generally is just too much effort. As per usual, we do also have the sculpting detail of the TARDIS door handle, as well as the lock just above this, which has been nicely sculpted and given a golden paint tap over the top. Flipping around to the opposite panel, we do also have your standard design of the pull to open box, which once again has had this rather nice printed sign added over the top, with your usual lettering, which you can very clearly read, and then also applied over the top of this, there is some additional weathering detail that has been added, once again giving the impression of the TARDIS actually been rather battered at this point in the show's history. TARDIS window panels now, these are exactly the same sculpt to all of the previous TARDIS boxes that have been released, therefore we do have the grained effect that has been used on these bottom two panels here, and the rest of the panes are just your usual smooth plastic. The paint application itself has also seen a little bit of a revision. Weathering around the sides of the panels, almost this collection of muck, has also been used, very similar to that of the previous B&M TARDISes that have also been released. However, this time round it does seem to be a little bit more exaggerated. Very clearly on these panels here at the very top we do have these collections of a darker paint tap, and generally the actual paint itself does seem to be given a slightly darker wash around the top as well, just to give an impression of mud, and I imagine that this is something that will once again vary between the different toys, so it may be worth going into store and picking out your own by hand in order to get one that you like the look of. Of course this does continue around the sides of the box as well, however it does seem to be slightly more toned down, as you can see around the sides here, and then once again the same does apply to the back as well. Due to this TARDIS not having a phone on the inside of the pull to open box, of course both of the doors can open as per usual to reveal absolutely no insert on the inside of the box, which is of course accurate once again to the TARDIS prop as used within the classic series. And of course something of which that a few people were a little bit concerned about when they first revealed that they were going to be revising the base and doing a different sculpt is that if the doors could actually open still, and they can, and we do also have this little button here at the very bottom which does of course also close the right hand side door as well, and I am happy to say that this does in fact work, because on my first B&M TARDIS that function was in fact broken and it was a little bit annoying, so I'm glad to see that both my other two TARDISes have worked just as well as the original versions. And of course, due to the TARDIS doors opening, you can nicely pose the Doctor looking out, or probably in the Caves of Androzani actually, crawling to the TARDIS doors in order to seek refuge on the inside. The police public call box signage around the very top is exactly the same sculpt to usual, however much like the other B&M TARDISes, once again one of the main features of these products is in fact using different signage in order to make these TARDISes look like the different variations of police box throughout the different eras without really changing the sculpt too drastically. And I think in the case of this TARDIS it does work rather well, so this time around the signage does of course have a rather light blue background along with the text along the front here that is of course a very bright white. However, much like the rest of the TARDIS, because this box does seem to have gone through the wars, much like the Doctor himself, this does in fact have a weathered design applied over the top, and very similar to the windows themselves and the different panes, we do in fact have almost this muck collection at the very bottom here. The same can also be said for the opposite sides as well. Some of this mud is in fact different on the opposite sides. As you can see, this is in fact much more dirty compared to the front, and of course a little bit less so around the back. And then finally on the fourth side we do have a middle sort of section with a bit of dirt around here, and then nothing really too much else around the sides. So I really do like this, it is very effective, and does certainly make this police box once again stand out from the other variations. Then of course, finally, to finish off the police public core box, we do have the sculpting of the stacked roof in a B&M first, which is very exciting indeed. Once again, the rest of this has in fact been given your standard wooden texture, along with additional weathering applied around the sides, really nicely bringing out that detail. And then of course we do also have these little side sections that have been applied as well. Much like all of the classic series TARDISes, we get the plinth at the very bottom, which does of course hold the light at the very top, which has been sculpted from your usual clear plastic. And of course we get the lid, which is the same colour as the rest of the box, with the little legs around the side keeping it in place. Although I do believe that this is inaccurate to the light as seen within the Caves of Androzani, it still kind of does the job. And of course, many Doctor Who Classic Series action figure collectors have been waiting for this moment for many years, to be able to plonk the brand new 5th Doctor TARDIS in the very middle of the Doctor Who TARDIS collection. Now this is of course the rest of the sculpts that do use the stacked roof so far within the classic series, and I must admit I actually think that the 5th Doctor TARDIS is one of the most effective classic series TARDISes that have been released to date. I think that the 7th Doctor TARDIS, as lovely as it is, it's probably my favourite in fact. I think that this one looks a lot more accurate to the actual box within the TV show. I think that is completely down to the base at the very bottom. It just makes the dimensions of the product almost create this illusion of it looking a little bit better or more like the classic series box. And of course the TARDIS collection update that we have all been waiting for. Here is the 5th Doctor classic box alongside the other classic series TARDIS boxes within my collection, with the exception of the original 4th Doctor TARDIS box that was released a number of years ago alongside these two releases. Unfortunately I never got one back in the day, and quite frankly I regret it. I really wanted one, never got to have it, and it is too expensive for me to buy these days because it goes for insane prices on eBay. And of course naturally as well, with the exception of the upcoming Barry Newbury style Shada TARDIS, which of course will be reviewed at some point in the near future. But overall this 5th Doctor TARDIS really nicely sits in well with the other classic series TARDIS exteriors, and all of them look so satisfying together. So overall, for the Doctor Who 5th Doctor and TARDIS from the final 5th Doctor story, the Caves of Androzani, as a part of the B&M exclusive line of Doctor Who action figures from 2019, once again Character Options have pulled off another really effective Doctor and TARDIS exterior set. Considering that both of these figures are using pre-existing sculpts, I think that they've done a really great and creative job of bringing these releases to our shelves. To start off with the TARDIS, in all honesty, I actually think that this is one of my favourite TARDIS exteriors that have ever been released by Character Options, and certainly my favourite from the B&M TARDISes that have been released so far. As for the 5th Doctor figure, it is a little bit of an unusual one. It's certainly not a figure that I would really recommend to your day-to-day casual Doctor Who action figure collectors, because it is a very unique figure from a very unique moment within Doctor Who history, and you can't really say it is from any other story. But that said, the paint application is once again really impressive, and generally overall this does not feel like a budget set. I think that the paint application is very sharp, costume changes are very nice and welcome. Only complaint for the 5th Doctor figure is that it would have been nice to see a little bit of blood splatters around the top half of the face, as well as on the hands themselves, especially considering that the majority of the costume is quite dirty, and it only really makes sense to have a little bit of that dirt replicated on the hands as well as the head, just to make it consistent with that of the rest of the body. And certainly I love the similarities between this figure and the 13 Doctors set version of the 5th Doctor. I certainly think that it is a lot more of an accurate representation to that of the 5th Doctor costume. And naturally, for long-term classic series Doctor Who action figure collectors, this one is obviously a must. The 5th Doctor Regenerated is a figure that we have wanted for a very long time to go alongside the 6th Doctor Regenerated, and another TARDIS exterior prop to add to the collection. What is not to like? For $19.99, this product is really good, obviously available from B&M select stores throughout the UK, so I certainly recommend tracking one down if you can, because by far this is one of my favourite sets that have been released by this line to date. It certainly gives me high hopes for the upcoming sets released as a part of this line as well. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about the Fifth Doctor and TARDIS, please do leave them in the comments section below, and I will of course reply to them at some point in the near future. And do also stay tuned to The Host Productions for more future Doctor Who action figure reviews of the other B&M exclusive collector sets from 2019. So thank you very much for watching this review, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.